My name's Tom Gamble, and I serve as one of the ministers at the Fairland Christian Church in Niles, Michigan. And over a 10-day period, this is day 3, we are walking through the life of Joseph as outlined in the book of Genesis. We're learning lessons from the account of his life. Yesterday we were in chapter 39, and I want to start by reading the very last verse of chapter 39. It says this: "The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed." Now today, picking up, Joseph is indeed in charge of the prison. And we find out as chapter 40 begins that he was attending to the needs of the chief baker and the chief cupbearer. The Bible tells us that these two men had committed an offense against the king, and he was angry with them, and so put them both in prison. Then one night, both the cupbearer and the baker had a dream. And the Bible tells us that each dream had an interpretation. In the morning, Joseph could tell that both the cupbearer and the baker were troubled, and that their faces were downcast. They explained that they both had dreams, but that there was no one to interpret their dreams. In reply, Joseph said this. He said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." God was going to interpret the dreams through Joseph. So what were those dreams and their interpretations? Well, we're going to read from Genesis chapter 40 to learn more. Genesis chapter 40, we're going to start at verse number 9. It says this: "So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, 'In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand.' Then Joseph said to him, 'This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly, when you were his cupbearer.'" Now, following that interpretation of the dream of the cupbearer said this to Joseph. He said, "Joseph, remember me. Mention me to Pharaoh when you return to your position. Explain that I'm here. You see, I've done nothing wrong deserving to be in this prison, and I want to get out." And then we read of the interpretation of the dream of the chief baker. The Bible says this, starting at verse number 16. "When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, 'I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head.' And Joseph answered and said, 'This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you.'" We find out then that the dreams turn out just as Joseph said they would. The cupbearer was restored to his position, while the chief baker, the Bible tells us, was indeed hanged on a tree. Today's lesson. Drawing from the account of Joseph, I want to go back and read 2 verses in chapter 40, verses 6 and 7. It said this, and this is leading into the fact when Joseph walked into the prison cell the morning after they had their dreams. It says, "When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, 'Why are your faces downcast today?'" When I read those verses, what stood out to me is that we need, as followers of Jesus, to show genuine concern for others when we can tell that something in their life is just not right. You see, Joseph could have ignored the fact that they looked troubled, that their faces were downcast, but he did not. Instead, he asked them what was troubling them. The question is, do we do the same? When we notice that those around us are having difficulty or a tough day and we don't know why, do we take the time to inquire, hey, can I help? What's wrong? Would you like to share? I'm here. Or do we hurry on figuring we just don't have time to spend listening to someone else's problems? You know, when we take the time to listen to others, it can be a huge blessing to them. And not only that, but it also can be a great blessing to us. And you know, to Joseph, he inquired what was the problem, what was bothering them, why their faces were downcast. And it ended up being a blessing to him, as eventually, and we'll find out tomorrow, 2 years later, the blessing came when that cupbearer did remember Joseph for interpreting his dream. Thinking of this, there is a passage I want to read, Romans chapter 12. Paul says this, starting at verse number 9. In fact, I would recommend that you read the verse 9 through the end of the chapter of chapter 12. It gives us some great Christian principles on things we should be doing as followers of Jesus. But notice this, the beginning of verse 9 says this, let love be genuine. And then skipping down to verse number 15, it says this. It says, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. You know, when we have friends who are having just a joyous time in their life and a time when they're just uplifted, we should rejoice with them in their time of rejoicing. But when they are weeping, when they're mourning, going through a very difficult time, when their faces are downcast and they're troubled, we need to go alongside of them and mourn with those who mourn, seeking to be there for them. Tomorrow, assignment, I would suggest you read ahead to chapter 41 of Genesis. But before we go, just a few things to be praying about. You know what? Ask the Lord to make sure that your heart is sensitive to the needs of others around you and that your eyes are open to see that others are dealing with difficult things that you can step in and be a good listener to for them. We'll see you tomorrow.